There is a big difference between being told something out of love and being told something from someone who's in a position of power trying to impose it down on us. In general, I don't think we generally like people telling us what to do. We like to kind of make our own decisions. But put us in Penn Station in New York and take away all the signs that tell us how to get to the train that we need to get on, and we're going to look for the first person who can tell us what to do, who can guide us along the way. Because not only would we be helpless, but we would also feel horribly alone, seeing everyone else walking with confidence to their destination while we stand there confused and helpless. When I was a child, I went to Holiday World with my family and some friends, and somehow I got separated from the group. And I wandered around for what seemed like days. It was probably about 7 minutes, but it seemed like I had been in the wilderness, for 40 days. And I made it to the front of Holiday World at the entrance, and there's that big statue of Santa Claus. And he has that menacing grin on his face, just mocking me with his jolliness, just staring me down because I'm going to be an orphan for the rest of my life. God only knows if I'm ever going to be found again. And so when my parents finally found me, I was emotionally and physically exhausted. This is why commandments given out of love are so important. Because they spare us the confusion, the wandering, the exhaustion, the feeling of isolation that is brought on by being left to our own devices. This is the experience of Moses in that first reading, who says with joy, "For what great nation is there that has God so close to it, as the Lord our God is to us, when we call upon him? Or what great nation has been given such statutes and ordinances that are as just as the whole law which has been given to us today?" These are not the words of someone who feels oppressed by the law. These are not the words of someone who feels like the man is putting his thumb down on him. These are the words of someone who is rejoicing that the Lord loves them enough to give them the law that will guide them to salvation. Unfortunately, the general perception of commandments, it seems to me, is that they're coming from a power that is trying to control us. And that immediately puts us on edge and on the defensive. And this, I'm afraid, is the growing position that many take in front of the church today in our culture. That the church is just another institution of power that is seeking to dominate our lives and eliminate our freedom and make us slaves to the commandments. Now, maybe we don't use those words, but maybe every now and then little thoughts creep into our minds and we start to say, well, going to Mass every Sunday? Is that really necessary? Surely God's not going to send me to hell for just missing one Sunday Mass. And it's a little diabolical voice that keeps creeping in, and it says, well, does the church really mean that about contraception? Does the church really expect us to live that way? Surely they understand. And little by little, we start to kind of rationalize away all the commandments. I keep most of the Sabbath day holy, but the whole thing, surely I could do a little bit of work here and there. I lie just a little bit, but not as much as everybody else does. Surely God's not going to punish me for that. And little by little, all these things, all these commandments given to us out of love, we start to push away because they're not in line with what we prefer, with the direction that we would prefer to go. And the underlying assumption is that somehow, and this is so diabolical, that somehow life is more miserable when we are faithful to the commandments of God. I think this is the general sense in our culture. If you want to be free, then push all that stuff aside and do what you want. And the church says, no, if you want to be fulfilled, if you want to be happy, if you want to stay on the road to salvation, then be faithful to the Lord who loves you and has given these commandments to you out of love. Because the more we take down the signs at Penn Station and the more we let go of the hands of our parents at Holiday World, the more disoriented we become. And we forget where we are and where we're headed, and life becomes full of isolation and exhaustion. We forget that it was a source of pride for the people of Israel to be given this command, this law of God, because it separated them from all the other nations. It showed how much God loved them because he cared enough to tell them where to go and what to do, like any parent would do for their child. And yet, little by little, we see it. Read the book of Judges, read the book of Deuteronomy, it's all there. Little by little, they started to say to themselves, we want to live like everybody else. We want to live like every other nation. So give us a king, because God is not enough for us. So give us a king who will rule over us so that we can be like every other nation. And they forgot. They forgot that they were the chosen people. They let it go because they wanted to be like every other nation. They forgot that they were God's special possession because they wanted to live like every other nation. And this is the worrisome thing in our church today, that there is no distinction between the way we live and the way everyone else lives. Because we want to live like every other nation. We want to be like everybody else. And so we resist the fact that we have been chosen and that being chosen makes some kind of demand on our lives. And we end up alone and isolated. I mean, look at our culture today. We have never, ever been more isolated than we are today. In a world that claims to be so connected, we are more alone and depressed and anxious than ever because we have allowed someone else to define who we are. Friends, what keeps us together more than anything is the fact that God has chosen us as his special people. And out of love for us, he has laid out a path marked with signs and teachings and truths that point us to the pitfalls and the traps that we have to avoid. It's not a matter of controlling our path. This is not what the church is trying to do. The church is illuminating the path to salvation so that we can be reminded of who we are and where we're headed. St. Edith Stein, who died in a concentration camp in Auschwitz, said, "The nation doesn't simply need what we have, it needs what we are." I think more than anything, this is what our nation and what our community needs. It needs who we are. It needs us to be the special people of God, the chosen people of God. It needs us to live the fact that we have been chosen well, not to rub it in other people's faces and say, look at us, we've been chosen and you haven't. No. It means that we recognize the fact that we have been chosen for the sake of the world. We have been chosen to be a light to the nations, a people that God has set apart to lead us out of darkness into his wonderful light. This is why we have been chosen. And if we resist that call, the world remains in darkness. And we live like everyone else, and we don't do anyone a bit of good. we have been chosen. We have been chosen out of love by God so that we can lead others to salvation. And so we have to live that election well. We have to be the people that God has made us to be so that we can move this world out of darkness into light, to true freedom, where we can fully live and be the people that God has made us to be.